Okay, it's time to begin. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to have a short presentation about cost segregation and specifically the tax law behind it and the court cases that kind of shape how we go about that tax law. So, thank you for joining. Like I said, just barely feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from so we can get a better understanding of who we've got here. Uh, Also, if you have questions that come up while we're going through the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'll try to address them as we go as they're relevant. But we'll also have a question and answer section at the very end for any questions that get missed. Okay, so to start off, I want to just do a short introduction for the company and myself. We are Layton USA. We are an international tax consulting firm with over 25 years of experience. We offer several different tax solutions, tax products, specialty tax incentives, and specifically on the team I work with in the commercial real estate realm. And that's kind of where it falls in. So my name's Will Whiteman. I don't think I've introduced myself yet, but yeah, my name's Will Whiteman. I'm our lead cost seg consultant engineer here at Layton. I've got about a decade of experience in cost engineering, with the majority of that coming in cost segregation specifically. So I've been able to work with thousands of clients and to help reallocate hundreds of millions worth of dollars in accelerated depreciation through cost segregation. So hoping to help everyone listening to this call learn about how you can maybe do the same for your business or for your real estate portfolio. So today we are going to kind of start from the beginning at a high level and go over what cost segregation is for anyone that may not be familiar with it, how depreciation works with cost segregation. We're going to shortly touch on the One Big Beautiful Bill that just passed and how that affects cost segregation. And then we're going to get kind of in the detailed topic for today of case law and one specific case called the Whiteco Industries case, where we can kind of learn how past court cases have influenced the cost segregation industry and how we can use them to take advantage of the tax benefits with real estate and to better plan ahead when it comes to real estate tax planning. Okay, so starting off with the basics, what is depreciation? So hopefully everyone's pretty somewhat familiar with what depreciation is, and what it is basically assets get older over time, they degrade. This process is referred to as depreciation. So depending on what the asset is, it'll depreciate over a longer life. Some things are expected to last longer than others, a building compared to a car, to a computer, and things like that. So using those examples, typically a building, if we had a building for $1 million, it sits in a 39-year class life. It would depreciate over a straight line for 39 years. So taking $1 million divided by 39, you'd be able to take a $25,000 depreciation deduction every year until you use it up. And then looking at a different asset class like a vehicle, if you had a vehicle that you spent $30,000 on, it would have a class life of 5 years. You'd take 30,000 divided by 5, take a depreciation deduction of $6,000 every year. So every asset kind of has a different class life that has been assigned by the IRS, and that is what you're able to depreciate on. Certain things like real estate is kind of unique because even though they are getting older, depreciating on paper, they are typically going up in value due to appreciation. So it's kind of a double benefit for real estate owners there because of that. So going back to the real estate portion of this, looking at buildings, they sit in the longest lived asset class in the tax code. So as we saw, that commercial building sits in a 39-year asset class. For residential buildings, that is 27 and a half years. But that's not the most correct way to handle these things, because your building has a lot of different assets, a lot of different components, and some of those should be depreciated over 5, 7, 15 years, much shorter tax lives, instead of the longest one of 27 and a half or 39 years if it's a commercial building. So how do we separate or segregate out those assets from your building? Well, here comes cost segregation. So we're able to unlock the power of it because of depreciation, but this is where it comes in. This is why it's useful to be able to split those out in a correct way. So why do we do it? Why do we do cost segregation? Well, it's all comes back to the time value of money, because as you could see with a commercial building, waiting 39 years to see that full benefit is a long time. You would much rather have $1 today because it's worth more with what you can do with it in reinvesting than 39 years from now. So $1 today is worth much more than $1 tomorrow. And that is kind of the overarching principle for cost segregation, because you're able to accelerate that depreciation into shorter tax lives by segregating out those shorter lived assets, and you get the immediate tax savings, which increases your cash flow. You can reinvest that cash flow, and overall increases your ROI on your real estate investments or in your business, if that's where you decide to put the additional money. So looking at a little more detailed breakdown of how we operate with cost segregation, it's an IRS approved method. It's been around for quite a while. It's not a tax credit. It is a depreciation deduction. It's tax deferment. We're accelerating depreciation and pushing those taxes out, which, like I said, is useful because of the time value of money, being able to reinvest those dollars today. So IRS approved method, we go about it by reverse engineering buildings using engineering-based methods. And that's kind of where, people like me with a background in engineering get looped into this tax world, because you are looking a lot at the mechanical, plumbing, electrical systems that go into a building, and being able to understand those and assign correct costs while segregating them out from the overall building gets pretty complicated, and it needs to be done correctly. So being able to segregate those costs out, we're able to depreciate them at different rates instead of the fixed 27 and a half or 39 years. We can segregate them out into 5, 7, 15 years instead, which allows you to see the benefit much sooner. And then at the end, there's a bonus, that we're able to take advantage of in cost segregation and a lot of other tax things when it comes to assets. And it's exactly what I said. It's bonus depreciation. And this is just a fixed rate that's fluctuated over the years that allows you to take a percentage of everything you identify in the very first year. So this is fluctuated between 0 to 100% on average over the last 20 years, being around 50. And like I said, if you're able to segregate a percentage of your building into shorter tax lives, you can then take another percentage of that in the very first year because of bonus depreciation. We're going to talk a little more about bonus depreciation and how that works when it comes to cost segregation. So looking at those shorter asset classes, just briefly covering the things that we can't segregate out, things that stay in that 27 and a half or 39 year asset class are inherently permanent structures, part of your building. So walls, windows, permanent flooring. And then you've got the 15-year asset class for land improvements. So your parking lot, sidewalks, curbs, gutters, things like that. And then the shortest asset class is the 5 or 7 year personal property. So things like equipment and furniture, removable flooring, stuff like that we can take at 5 or 7 years. So looking at a quick example, if we had our $1 million building again, it depreciates over 39 years, you would get a fixed depreciation deduction of $25,000 every year until you used it up. Well, what does that look like when it comes to cost segregation? If we take that same $1 million building, we're able to segregate out 200,000 of that into 15-year and another 100,000 into 5-year, leaving 700,000 untouched in the 39-year bucket. We're able to accelerate, 300,000 of that $1 million into an accelerated depreciation deduction. And then taking your straight line fixed depreciation deduction from the remaining 700,000, you get $317,000 as a total depreciation deduction for your building. And depending on the bonus rate, if it's 100%, you'd get that all the very first year when it comes to cost segregation. And based on our example here in the place and service being 2021, that would be the case. But depreciation was 100%. So we'd get $317,000 as a first year depreciation deduction compared to, as we could see in the last slide, just $25,000. So really, really big difference that, as we talked about, allows you to free up that cash flow or improve that cash flow by not having to pay those taxes, so you can reinvest it into more property or into your business. Okay, so just wanted to cover real quick when you should be doing a cost segregation or who can qualify. Well, if you bought a building, just built a building, or did a major remodel renovation, those are all triggers for a cost segregation study. So if you're curious hey, will my building qualify? Is this worth it? We're always happy to provide, no cost estimates. If you want to reach out and, send us your building information, usually we just need a couple things like the address and what you paid. And then we can give you a breakdown of what that depreciation deduction, that accelerated depreciation would look like in your situation and how it could potentially help you. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered what depreciation is, what cost segregation is by using and how it uses depreciation, I want to talk about how that's been affected with the One Big Beautiful Bill that you may have heard of passing in July. Well, what happened is the main thing is it brought back bonus depreciation to 100%. And I say brought back because in Trump's first term, 2017 to 2022, it was 100%. And after that, it was set to phase down by 20% until it went back to zero. So 2023, we had 80, 2024, we had 60. This year, it was set to be at 40%. But the One Big Beautiful Bill passed, making any properties placed in service after January 19th, 2025, eligible for the 100% bonus depreciation again. And, this makes it much more lucrative on the cost segregation side, because like I said, instead of just segregating those assets into 5, 7, 15 years, you're able to take the entire benefit very first year instead of waiting the 5, 7, 15 years, which is obviously better than the 39-year that we looked at originally. It's more than twice as good, but getting the full benefit first year makes it even better. So this is great for real estate investors, for building owners, anyone that's buying assets, because you can depreciate the full amount the very first year. So real quick, again, just looking at the same example that we had to kind of show you how big of a deal that One Big Beautiful Bill passing is for 100% bonus depreciation. We have the same example, but I've added a column of what it would have looked like at just 40% bonus if that bill wouldn't have passed. So instead of taking the full 200 and 100 at 15 and 5-year property, we would have only been able to take 80,000 of the 15-year and 40,000 of the 5-year, giving a $120,000 deduction at 40% versus the full 300 at 100% bonus. So more than double the benefit. And when it comes to actual tax savings, if we assumed a 30% tax rate at 40% bonus, it would have yielded a $41,000 tax savings. at the 100% bonus rate, it's 100,000. So more than double, and pretty significant when it comes to the ROI, as you're able to get a big portion of your initial investment. If you're putting 20% down, 25% down on a property, you're getting a big portion of that back the very first year, just because of the tax benefits. Okay, so now that we kind of covered where we're sitting with bonus, where we're sitting with cost segregation, I do want to get into the specific topic of our webinar today. I've got a question that just came in from Jay that I want to address before we move into this, is how long to depreciate leasehold improvements? So that's a great question. We actually did a webinar on leasehold improvements specifically because it's a more lucrative area when it comes to cost segregation and just depreciation in general, because there's an additional benefit called qualified improvement property, or QIP, where you're able to segregate out portions you wouldn't normally be able to on a regular building into a 15-year accelerated tax life. So sometimes on renovations, instead of being able to segregate 20-30% of your building with a renovation, it could be up to 60 to 80% because they would all qualify under that qualified improvement property. So if you've done a renovation in the past, definitely something to look into. Okay, so let's move into the topic, the main detailed topic of this webinar. How does tax law affect cost segregation? So with cost segregation, we've got an IRS audit techniques guide that's about 350 pages that basically goes through how an IRS agent would audit a cost segregation study, everything they want to see in there. And there's a lot of past court cases that are referenced and build out the foundation for that audit techniques guide. So being able to understand what has happened in the past, what court rulings have been made in audits on cost segregation studies previously, make a really big difference for us to be able to build really good studies, bulletproof studies, be able to educate you on what to be looking for in a good study, and overall be able to defend our studies based on the reclassifications that we make. So there's a lot of legal weight here to understand how these operate, because it allows us to make the best decisions for our clients, or for investors when it comes to cost segregation studies, because this is kind of the precedent. There's not like a book from the IRS. I mean, we've got the audit techniques guide, but there's not a very simple, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do. I mean, that's just the tax world, right? There's a lot going excuse me, a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces. So being able to know what they've ruled in the past really influences our decisions moving forward, because they've kind of come out and said, hey, this is what we've ruled, this is how we want it to be, and we've got that in writing, that ruling, to base our reclassifications, our studies, our decisions on, based on that. So case law is really important. There's a lot of big studies or big cases that are referenced in the audit techniques guide that the IRS uses all the time, and that we use all the time as well when going through certain buildings. So today I want to talk about one specific one of the bigger ones. It's called Whiteco Industries versus Commissioners. It's pretty old, from 1978. So you can see how it's stuck around, and they made some really good points here that still apply today. So a little background on what this case was. Whiteco was a billboard leasing company, and the IRS claimed that their billboards were permanent structures, but Whiteco claimed that they were personal property. So IRS wanted them to depreciate over 39 years. Whiteco wanted to depreciate over that shorter personal property tax life. So this was a big deal. They claimed that these were temporary billboards, removable, not permanent, and part of their operation. So what happened is the court needed to decide, how do we define what's permanent and what's not, to be able to reclassify things as 5-year property or 5 to 15-year property, depending on what kind of asset it is. So they need to come up with a test to figure this out, and that's why or how we got the White cofactors or the White test factors. So they came up with 6 different questions that you can ask to determine whether or not something is permanent and should be depreciated as real property at 39 years or a shorter personal property tax life. So real quick, I'm just going to go through these, and then we're going to look at an example to see how it applies in the real world. So first question, is the property readily removable? Is it easily uninstalled? Can it be reused, picked up and moved somewhere else? Number 2, is it affixed to the building or land? How it's affixed kind of makes a big deal, whether it's bolted, nailed, cemented in the ground. That kind of determines how permanent it is, whether it was intended to be removed or not. And that goes along with question number 3. What was it designed to do? Was it designed to be permanent, or was it designed to be moved if needed? And I rolling into question 4. Was it intended to remain permanently? Kind of similar with the last 2. Did the owner expect it to stay there for the life of the building, or was it expected to be replaced every so often? Question number 5, would removal cause damage? If you took this asset out, would it damage the rest of the property? If so, it was probably meant to be there for a while. And then lastly, number 6, what do local laws or lease terms say? Sometimes the lease will dictate how permanent something's supposed to be, if it's supposed to be replaced with tenant turnover or something like that. So these White cofactors still matter. They're in, like I said, in the audit techniques guide for the IRS. They're still being used, the same framework, when the IRS is going through and questioning whether an asset is permanent or not. And we use it too, going through a study to determine whether or not we can take something as personal property at a 5, 7, 15-year instead of leaving it in the 39-year asset class. So it's a really good repeatable test that we can apply to all kinds of assets, and it's flexible across every kind of building type, whether it's residential to commercial and everything in between. So now that we've got an understanding of this specific case, I want to look at how it's applied and give you an example of how you can use this for your own properties, or when analyzing how much depreciation you could potentially have in your building. So something I think everyone's pretty familiar with is flooring. If you're just picturing an office space that you're in, or you're an apartment house, something like that. If we've got carpet versus hardwood flooring. So if we go through the tests here, let's determine, what may be permanent and what may not be permanent. So readily removable carpet, yes, it's designed to be pulled off. Pretty simple there. Hardwood flooring, not really. It's nailed in there. It's expected to stay there for a while. 2, how is it affixed? The carpet's light adhesive, can be pulled up pretty easily. Again, hardwood flooring, nailed down, pretty tough to remove. Number 3, what was it designed to do? Carpet's meant to be replaced every 5 to 10 years. It's not expected to last that long. It wears out. So it's designed to be modular flooring. Whereas hardwood flooring is a permanent solution. Sometimes you'll see older buildings with original hardwood floors from 100 years ago. It lasts a long time. So it's expected to be there for the life of the building. 4, was it intended to remain permanently? Like I said, in the last one, no, carpet's meant to be swapped out, and hardwood flooring is expected to last. Number 5, would removal cause damage? Minimal damage with carpet removal. It's usually just glued there on the slab or the substructure, pretty easy to remove and lay new carpet. Whereas hardwood flooring, there's potential you could damage the subfloor or other things when trying to pry all those pieces out based on how it's affixed. And lastly, 6, the lease terms often dictate that the carpet should be replaced with a new tenant, and where hardwood flooring, like I said, despite new tenants with turnover and things like that, can still stay in really good shape and last the life of the building. So in conclusion, this is a good example to kind of wrap your head around that carpet usually it does qualify as personal property, usually in the 5-7 year asset class due to its nature, whereas hardwood flooring is expected to last as long as the building is, and it is deemed as real property, 1250 real property, or stays in that 39-year asset class tax life. So the main takeaway that I hope everyone can get from this and is basically that you can look at your buildings, whether you're building buildings or buying buildings, you can kind of do an analysis beforehand to see life depreciation is in this building. You know, how removable are the assets using the white coat factors? Are most things meant to last the life of the building? Are they permanent, or is there a lot of short-lived assets that you would be able to take advantage of through accelerated depreciation? So it's kind of it's a two-way street, because you know, if you're buying a building that has a lot of carpet, if we just look at the flooring, for example, since that's what we touched on, a lot of carpet, it's like, great, we're going to be able to segregate that out, and we're going to get a really big front-loaded depreciation deduction because of all these shorter-lived assets. The downside is you're probably going to need to replace the carpet in 5 to 10 years because it does wear out, but you get that depreciation benefit. Whereas on the other side, if your entire building is hardwood floor, you're not going to get that accelerated depreciation, but it's going to last the life of the building. You hopefully won't have as much maintenance costs down the road or renovation costs to replace the flooring. So it kind of, there's pros and cons to both. Obviously, like I said, with the time value of money, being able to have a good chunk of personal property that you can pull out through cost segregation and accelerate that depreciation, get that money out today, is much more valuable than waiting the full 39 years to get that full benefit. So being able to think ahead and kind of plan while you're looking at buildings to see what kind of tax benefits there may be is a pretty big deal when it comes to real estate investing. And we're also always happy to help even at that phase for you when it comes to estimating. If you had two buildings that maybe you're trying to decide between, feel free to reach out to us. We could give you a high level estimate of what may look better on the depreciation side from a tax standpoint, so you can kind of do your tax planning and see how that's going to benefit you at the end of the day. So we talked a lot about white coat here. I wanted to point out real quick, there's several other major court cases if you're curious. Like I said, you can Google the Audit Techniques Guide for Cost Segregation. It's going to call out a lot of these things and more. So here's a few other examples of cost seg court cases that you can look up that have helped determine what we do in the industry and how we do it correctly. And it's kind of dictated how we operate to this day, despite how old they are. Okay, so that's all I've got today. Thank you for joining and doing a high-level review of cost segregation, as well as a little more detailed dive for how we operate in the cost segregation space when it comes to tax law and past court cases. So if you have any questions, we've got some time for questions now. Feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those right now. Got another question in the chat is, how do you calculate the basis for land? This is the great question. So this is one of the first steps that we take when doing a cost segregation study, is making sure to allocate a proper land value, because with all the assets we looked at, we're talking about 39-year, 15, 5-year, those all depreciate over that tax life. Well, land doesn't depreciate. So we have to give it a value, but we have to separate it from the value that we can segregate from into 5, 7, 15 years. So there's a process here. A lot of times we will use county data to analyze what they've deemed the land value to be, or we can use the appraisal or appraised values to determine a proper land value. But that's definitely part of our process to make sure we can get that land value in a good spot and a competitive spot, because like I said, you can't depreciate it. It's always better to have that as low as possible while still being able to defend. You don't want to just put it at $100. It needs to make sense. You need to have a defense is how you got the land value that you're using. So being able to have a proper land value is part of our process and something that we can help you figure out. Another question from Alex. Use of modular equipment, HVAC, power for industrial and data center projects where equipment is user specific and movable. So this is a good question. I may not be answering this exactly how Alex is asking it, but when it comes to the equipment itself, a lot of times your CPA will just depreciate those over their correct tax lives without a cost segregation needed. So if you had a warehouse, you bought a bunch of equipment for your business, you've got those fixed costs, your CPA can just depreciate those over 5 years, take your bonus depreciation, and you see the benefit. There's no cost segregation needed in that situation. But for the building itself, if you were to buy a building that had all of the equipment in it, that's where a cost segregation would come in, because you don't know exactly how much each piece of equipment costs. And so we need to assign values to those, segregate them out into 5 years from your total purchase price. And that's kind of how it would operate on that end. But for anything you're buying separately, as far as equipment, you should be able to just depreciate that on its own. But we're always happy to look at your specific situation. One of the first things we'll always request is your depreciation schedule, past tax returns, so we can analyze, hey, they've already taken advantage of the furniture or the equipment, so we don't need to touch that. We'll just look at the building itself and segregate out the pieces of electrical behind that equipment that can be 5-year assets and things like that get a lot more complicated when it comes to the actual construction and analysis of the building itself. Okay. I'll wait 10 more seconds, see if anybody has any more questions that we're happy to answer. The team's dropped a few links in the chat. If you have any specific questions you want to book a meeting with us, we're happy to talk through your specific situation, your buildings, see if cost segregation may make sense, or maybe some of our other products. Okay, I think we'll call it then. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you learned a little more about cost segregation. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to provide an estimate or potentially look at any buildings that you may have that could see a benefit from cost segregation. Thanks again, everybody. We'll have a good one.